Olive oil is pretty much a staple in my house. I use it at least once a day, every single day of the week. So man, it would be awesome to me if I had a never-ending supply, like the widow in the story that we just heard. This poor woman was threatened with great poverty, so much so that her children were about to be sold into slavery to pay back her debt. And at first, the only thing that she had to her name was a very small bit of oil. It came about in order to save her and her sons that the prophet Elisha came up with a plan. He told this woman to go to her neighbors and to collect from them as many jars as she could get her hands on. A surplus of jars, an abundance, an excess of jars. So she did as she was instructed to do. And after she gathered up all these empty vessels, she took her trifling amount of precious oil and she began to pour it out. And she poured it out so that it miraculously filled those empty jars. She filled them all, one after another. She filled them with a free-flowing golden emollient, which was indeed gold for her, because she sold that oil, didn't she? She sold that oil to pay off her creditor and to buy back her sons, and still she had money left for them to live on. She was saved, you see, through the abundance of God. We very recently heard another quite similar story about oil. Remember, God told the prophet Elijah that a woman would provide food for him and keep him alive, even though the land was ravaged by drought. Do you remember that story? Can you recall it? So Elijah went to stay with this widow, but when he got to her house, she only had enough flour and enough oil to bake one last cake of bread for herself and her son. And she knew after they ate it, they were going to starve to death. But Elijah promised her if she would provide bread for him, there would be enough bread for them all. And it was so. As long as they needed the provision, the flour in her bowl never ran out, and the oil in her jug never ran dry. So both of these stories testify about the salvific, or the saving abundance of God. They're about the saving abundance of God. But they aren't just about the abundance that God provides. They are also, and perhaps I would like to say that they are even more so, about the abundance, the bounty, the plenty that God is. That God is. On this Thanksgiving Sunday, we very gratefully acknowledge the Lord for all of the goodness that we have in our lives. And gratitude is the right way and a righteous way for us to come before the Almighty. But we fall short if we understand the abundance of God as just material and physical gifts to us. Have you ever heard of the prosperity gospel or prosperity theology? Have you heard those terms before? The prosperity gospel is a theology that says if we just have enough faith, and if we maintain a positive, prayerful attitude, then God will bless us with everything that we need, from a perfect parking place, to perfect health, to all of the material wealth that we would ever want. And yet, there are some 795 million people. I just want to repeat that so you hear it. There are some 795 million people in the world who do not have enough to eat. Poverty.com estimates that every 10 seconds, a person dies of hunger or hunger-related causes. Now, is that because they just don't have enough faith, or because they don't have enough food? Have they not thought to prayerfully and with a positive attitude address God about their need? Jesus said that the poor will always be with you. And I think sometimes we use that as an excuse to accept and even to disregard the poverty that we see all around us. But he told us the poor would always be with us, and then he instructed us who are not impoverished about how we should care for those who are. That is, quite frankly, the call of the prophets, to feed and clothe the poor, to care for the orphaned and the widow, to protect the foreigner and the alien. That is the core ethic of the law that God gave to Moses. So if we choose to subscribe to the prosperity gospel, we need to be very sure that we aim our dividends towards those 795 million people who don't have enough to eat. And if we profess to believe in the gifts of God's abundance, just like the oil stories, then we need to reveal God's abundance. All four gospel accounts tell us this story about Jesus feeding hungry people. The stories vary a little bit in detail, but in each of them, Jesus feeds this multitude of people with very little bread and only a few small fish. In each case, he has compassion on those who are in need. In each case, he offers his gratitude for his resources, no matter how meager they were. And in each case, he offers the crowd enough to fill and to satisfy their hunger. And still, they have food left over. Again, as in the stories of Elijah and Elisha and this multiplying oil, when Jesus feeds those large crowds of 4,000 or 5,000 men, plus all of the women and the children that they have with them, it is an expression or a revelation of God's abundance, but not just the abundance that God provides. Even more so, it is a revelation about the abundance, the bounty, the plenty that God is. It's God's nature to be generous, because God is generosity. God is open-handedness and fecundity. Just like oil that continues to freely flow, and like bread that's broken and served in excess, God's nature is that of great abundance. For several weeks, Alan led the Sunday school class in this great study on the parables of Jesus. If you missed the study, he and I would recommend the book to you by Amy Gilbert Levine. It's a tremendous book. So these parables teach us what the kingdom of heaven is like. For instance, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant who sold everything he had in order to buy this one pearl of great value. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven, or it's like yeast that a woman hid into a batch of dough. More dough than she would ever be able to use herself. She hid that yeast inside of the dough so that it would continue to multiply and grow to be even more. Kingdom is like a teeny tiny mustard seed that grows with exponential potential. So what we learn about the kingdom from these parables is that the kingdom is prolific. It is abundant. It is even excessive. The parables also teach us how we should live if we want to dwell within it. So the person who dwells in the kingdom is a man who does good, even to his enemy. It is a person who offers hospitality to everyone, but especially to those who are in great need, people who will never ever be able to repay him. The person who lives in the kingdom of heaven is the person who balances the scales of justice, but not according to human standards. The scales must be balanced according to the generosity of God, who makes it rain on the righteous and the unrighteous without prejudice. In other words, if we want to live in this prolific, abundant, excessive kingdom, then we must be prolific, abundant, and excessive in our compassion and in our love. Jesus didn't just talk about the kingdom of heaven, what it looks like and who lives in it. He also showed through his example where and in whom this kingdom exists. His life was an ongoing parable then, if you will. It was a parable of God's presence poured out in humanity to saturate the human condition. So when Jesus gives sight to those who cannot see, when he strengthens the legs of people who are unable to walk, when he frees those who are possessed and oppressed by evil, then he demonstrates heaven's kingdom in a very real and concrete and knowable way. When he multiplies bread and fish in order to feed those who are hungry, and when he stretches human resources beyond what is logically possible, then he reveals that God's kingdom is a land of plenty, of bounty, of rich profusion, because this is, after all, the very nature of God. God is abundance. And when we live in God's presence, when we reside in God's kingdom, we ourselves become a gift of abundance. Our concern then is not about what we have or what we will be rewarded because of our great faith, but our concern is how we can give ourselves to others. kingdom dweller is hospitable and generous, compassion and resource sharing. Because as we more and more reflect the image of our prolific God, we too become more and more prolific. We are saved, you see, through the abundance of God. The abundance of love poured out on us like precious oil that fills us over and over again. Like an excessively generous amount of bread, more bread than we will ever be able to eat, offered to us to feed us and fill us and satisfy our hungry soul. It is this free-flowing love that turns us towards those who are in need, to elevate and uplift them, to share what we have, as meager as it might be, with those who have so much less and who are in need of so very much more. Humanity craves the gifts of God. Can I say that to you again? Humanity craves the gifts of God, a surplus of spirit, an excess of grace. We crave these gifts because these are the gifts that rescue us from ourselves. And by these same gifts, we share ourselves with others in order to rescue them. So I think it is only right on this particular Sunday that we offer our thanksgiving for the plenitude of God. It's only right that we give thanks for the God of abundance. It's only right that in the name of this generous, free-flowing love, we lift up our hearts in gratitude and we pledge ourselves to the world to be the great bounty of our life. And so together, in Christ's name, we say, Amen.